Hello everyone, it's Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore here, and welcome to the Music Masterclass. So this is my session that I do on Thursdays where we take a look at different aspects of creating music, and today I want to really be focusing mostly on improvisation, because this is something I've been talking about in my musicianship skills workshop. I've put out a couple of videos that I think you might find very useful if you're new to improvisation, or even if you're maybe not so new to improvisation, but are perhaps feeling a little stuck in what you're doing. And so what I want to do is do a really quick recap of what I actually talked about in those videos. You can go to the actual musicianship skills workshop on my site for more information. And Colleen, I see that your friend Karen isn't able to get in. Did she create an account? Hopefully she created an account already, because that's the first step. So it's, a free account is fine. So she'll have to do that first. But that's what would need to happen. So, yeah, I want to give you a little recap of what I've been talking about. What I've been talking about is the idea of improvising as creating melody and what it means to create melody without a whole lot of rigmarole about what chords you're on. But then this week's lesson, I did start to talk about dealing with chords a little bit and the 5 chord resolving to the 1 chord. And this is where I want to focus today a little bit and talk a little more about outlining, transitions between chords. And I'm going to do some demonstrations here, and then we're going to see who wants to come on and try their hand at some exercises. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to start by continuing where I had been in these videos, talking just about the key of C and a 1 chord and a 5 chord, because that's easiest to see things. And I'm going to just stick with the key of C and just the notes that are diatonic to C. I'm not going to introduce any chromaticism yet, but that's something I want to do in a minute. So I'm just going to improvise a little bit, and as I described in the lesson for this week, I'm going to be focusing on this relationship, the 7th of the 5 chord resolving to the 3rd of the 1 chord. Also, the 3rd of the 5 chord resolving up to the root. In a jazz context, we might actually just kind of hang on to that note and call it the major 7th and call it good. But traditionally speaking, it's a leading tone. It resolves up. So I'm just going to improvise in ways that attempt to work that in there. I'm not going to every single phrase that I play is not necessarily going to involve that, but more than average. It's going to be a conscious choice to work that in there. I had to end on the major 7th. Did I have to? No, but I'm a jazz guy. It's bred into me at this point. So I don't know if you were kind of paying attention to what was happening and thinking about the transitions when I went from 5 to 1. I was doing that an awful lot, but not every time. And especially, remember I did this? I had this little motif that I was developing, sequencing, and that one, right? I didn't care what note I resolved on there. I just wanted to move that motif around, and the motif said I'm going here. I went there, 3rds and 7ths, be damned. So that's a little bit of what I was doing there. But I mentioned the idea of additional chromaticism, and I want to talk about that a little bit here, because there's only so much you can do that's interesting sticking totally within the key. introducing chromaticism is definitely a tool you want to have to work with, and maybe especially while we're keeping things harmonically simple, especially if there's only going to be one or two chords, the chromaticism is actually going to make the difference in really adding some interest. Because it's hard to sustain interest with only one or two chords, especially if all you have to work with is the notes of the key. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's hard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce chromaticism as one of my tools in my shed. And here's what I want to do. I want to think about my one chord, C, E, and G, and I want to think about approaching any of these three notes by half step, whether that means I'm in the key or not. So if I want to approach my C by half step, it could be using the B, right? That'll do it. What about, that will do it also. D flat coming into C does it also. This is dissonant, right? This G against D flat, it's dissonant, but that's tension. We like tension. So I'm going to use that sometimes. In fact, let me just do that right now. Just working that D flat in as an approach to the C. Now realistically, this is one that has a whole lot of theory around it. We talk about the concept of tritone substitution and how D flat chords can substitute for G chords in the right context. And so there's a whole lot of talk around that specific approach. But in point of fact, that's probably not the most common approach. It's not, of all chromaticisms I want to show you, it's one of them, but it's not necessarily the most common. Now I can make it a little more, so if I combine it, if I do this, where I don't just have the D flat, but I also have the D, and then I could either just or go past the C and then come back to it. Right? So if you force yourself to use these devices, they become part of you. It's kind of like, I don't know, a vocabulary word, or whether you're learning a new vocabulary word in English or whatever your native language is, or if you're learning a foreign language and you learn a new word, you practice using it and eventually it just becomes a part of your vocabulary and you start using it more naturally. So that phrase, ba-da-boo-dum, is a really typical jazzism called an enclosure, where we take that C and surround it by a D and a B. And this, where we surrounded it with two notes above and one below, is sometimes called a double enclosure. So that's a particular jazzism, but yeah, it's worth working into your vocabulary if you have any interest in improvisation. So that's the approaches to the C. But now I'm going to do similar things with E. We've already approached the E with an F, which is in the key. But now I want to approach it with a D sharp into that E. And I'm going to do the same thing. I just want to experiment with how I can approach that E. Just was experimenting with using that D sharp. How long can I hang on it? Should I approach the D sharp itself from above or from below? These are things you experiment with in your improvisation to really see how you want to use that particular ingredient. another way, I often make analogies to language, but I often also make analogies to cooking. And I look at this as like a new spice that I'm not familiar with. Like epazote is an herb that I just became familiar with over the last year or so. It's a Mexican herb. I mean, I'm sure it exists in parts of the world, but it's used in Mexican cuisine, and I really wasn't familiar with it all at all. But then I started seeing these cooking shows where Patty Kinich, who's awesome, was talking about epazote, and so I bought some, and then what are you going to do with it? Well, you can do exactly what Patty did with it, sure. But I was like, well, let me try putting it in some other things and seeing what it tastes like, and what does it look like if I put in too much, and what does it look like if I don't put in enough, and what does it taste like, and how do I know when I'm craving the taste of epazote? I don't know until I start playing with that flavor. So, anyhow, that's an analogy I make. So I want to learn the taste of this note. And sometimes it's a passing tone where I'm actually putting the D like that. Sometimes I might use it as another one of those enclosure figures, right? Above and below. Or above and then two notes below. A double enclosure. So that's a common use of that note also. But, it doesn't have to be that. It could be arpeggiating this G chord and making it an augmented chord. And da-da-dum is still our voice leading, but I'm not actually necessarily playing the D always. So, these are all things I want you guys playing with too. So if you're sitting here at an instrument, by all means, be playing while I'm talking. It's annoying as heck when people do that to me when I'm trying to teach a private lesson and I'm talking to them and they're just noodling on the keyboard. I'm like, take your hands off the keyboard. I'm talking to you. But, here we have the luxury of play around all you want, right? So next, I want to come to the G. And I just want to do the same thing with the G. I want to look at approaching it with half steps, but now the half step below, like remember with C, the half step below was already in the key. All I had to introduce was the D flat. With E, the half step below, the half step above was in the key already. All I had to play with here was the half step below. With G, neither of the notes a half step above or below are in the key. So I'm going to want to play with both of them. But I'm only going to play with the F sharp briefly. And, I'll play with it first because it is a thing. So I'm doing the same thing, trying to approach the G using the F sharp. And using it as part of that passing tone kind of figure is really typical, as is using it as what's called a neighbor tone, where I'm already playing the G on the G chord, and then I just come down for a moment. The thing about this G is, the F sharp is, I don't typically want to really hang on to this while I'm playing my G chord, because my G chord really wants the F. The F sharp only functions as that sort of like passing tone or neighboring tone. I don't want to hang on that F sharp while I'm playing the G chord because it's the wrong seventh. G should have an F in it. A G7 chord should have an F in it. The 5 chord should have an F. Should have that seventh. But, melodically speaking, that F sharp is a fine note. But I want to put that aside now and focus on the A flat, because this you may have heard me talk about before. You definitely heard me talk about. I talked about it last week. That this A flat scale degree flat 6 is hugely important in music, and now we're not just talking about jazz, but we're talking about anything Romantic era and starting in the 1820s, we'll say. I don't know, I'm just making up a year. That's scale degree flat 6 as a way of introducing minor 5/4 chords to 1, and also as a way of introducing this flat 9 on a dominant chord coming to 1. That idea of using that scale degree flat 6 in major keys became really big in kind of, romantic era music, and it remains really big in jazz. And the thing it does is allows that 5 chord to have, yes, it's scale degree flat 6, but relative to the G chord, it's the flat 9. And now we are really talking jazz language. I mean, we could talk about those other notes. I could say D flat is a flat 5 or a sharp 4. Yeah. I could say this note here was a sharp 5, D sharp, or I could call it E flat, a flat 6, or a flat 13. Yeah, I can actually, those are things too. This flat 9 is when we really start really honing in on jazz language now. So I'm going to try to approach the G with that A flat now. Leaping down to that is a thing too, right? It's one of the few notes like this that any of these notes we might leap to sometimes, because that's part of the jazz feel also, of creating these unexpected leaps into a dissonance that you then immediately resolve. Accented appoggiaturas would be the classical term for that, but they're really big in jazz to do that with these chromatically altered notes. So, now that I've looked at all 3 notes of my tonic triad and how to approach them with half steps, now I want to play with them all. Okay? I'm going to just play with them all now. I think I worked them all in there. Pretty sure I did. So that idea of using those chromatic alterations as a way of targeting chord tones, it's a skill you practice. So one of the things that often comes up whenever anyone talks about improvisation here is, what does it mean to practice improvisation? Well, no, that is not a conversation that happens often unless I make it happen, because it's not something that people think that hard about normally. But I want people thinking about this. What does it mean to practice improvisation? Normally, when you think about practicing something, you're trying to practice the same thing over and over to get good at that thing, to make it be part of your muscle memory or whatever. Improvisation kind of defeats that a little bit, right? I mean, with improvisation, how do I put this? You're not playing the same thing every time, right? So if you improvise something and then you improvise again, you're not literally playing the same thing you just played before. If you do, you're not improvising. Improvising means playing it different every time, which is the opposite of what we usually do when practicing, which is trying to play it the same every time. So this idea that we are going against the grain of what practicing usually is, this is what makes learning improvisation different than learning almost any other skill. It relies on not doing it the same way every time. And so this is, I think, one of the blocks that people have when it comes to improvisation. Why am I not getting better at improvisation? Why don't I like my improvisations? Well, a big part of it is because you can practice it as much as you want, but you're never practicing it in the way you practice other things. You're never repeating yourself, and so you won't get better at it just by doing it over and over, unless you do the kinds of things that I'm talking about here. Because even though I wasn't playing the same melody over and over again, when I focused on just one variable, the D sharp resolving to E. When I just focused on that, just playing melodies, working in that D sharp and resolving it to E, trying to force my melodies to go there, then you are practicing something over and over. And maybe sometimes you do it and you just don't like it. It felt forced. Like my melody wasn't going there. Ba-ba-dum, ba-dum would have been much more natural. But ba-da-dum, ba-dum, I forced myself to go down to the D sharp. Well, you want to be aware of that. Ask yourself, did what I do just feel natural or did it feel forced? If it felt forced, then don't do that thing again. Or maybe try it a couple other ways before you give up on it, because maybe your first attempt doesn't work, but that doesn't mean it's never going to work. And I'm sure I could make that work in the right context. But the point is, we only have the one variable at a time that we're playing with, and so even if we don't do exactly the same way, we are at least only focusing on varying that one thing. The rest of our melodies can do whatever they want. We don't worry about them, but we focus on making that sound natural and trying to find melodic lines. Every time I play that melodic line, I am practicing that specifically. I'm practicing that sequence of notes, D to D sharp to E. And of course my finger slipped there. But every time I practice that sequence, now I'm reinforcing that sequence. Or if I want to do the or that little sequence, that's a nice one. I can try to work that type of sequence in, or that, I'm using the word sequence not in the technical sense of a motif moving by step, but that sequence of notes, the enclosure. So when you're practicing improvisation, you want to think of it in terms of what specifically am I practicing, so that you are getting repetition of that thing. Even though the rest of what you're playing is improvised, you're doing something over and over, and maybe it's still not identical because you are varying it, but you're varying it within this small range of, let me get D sharp to E, and just different ways of resolving D sharp to E, and different ways of approaching that, different ways of placing it rhythmically, etc. Different fingerings, if that's significant also for your instrument. So these are the things that we practice when we practice improvisation. We are teaching ourselves what individual spices taste like. This is coming back to that analogy. We're learning a new vocabulary word, how to use it naturally in a sentence. And yeah, it's not about practicing the same thing over and over again, but it is practicing one thing over and over, and practicing that one thing with variation, but with that awareness that that is the thing you're focusing on. So how much of jazz improv is about enclosures specifically? Rod, that is an excellent question. It's such an excellent question that I actually want to answer it really. Okay? I'm gonna give you an actual real answer to this in a moment. What I'm going to do first, though, is give you kind of an off-the-cuff answer. The off-the-cuff answer is, if you practice enclosures, you're going to play enclosures. We're going to play what we practice. So, if someone comes and tells you, hey, enclosures are really important, you should practice those, you're going to practice them, and then, by gosh, you're going to start playing them. There is a danger of overdoing that kind of practice. There's a thing that we talk about of licks, the word lick. Practicing licks, practicing not just individual little things like that, but maybe entire little phrases. Michael Olson, are you here? You know the lick. I never remember how that thing goes. Yeah. No. It's it's not that, right? It's something I see. There's this famous lick that supposedly everyone plays, and then everyone likes to call out everyone else when they're playing it. I've never learned that lick because I don't want to play that lick. Why would I want to play someone else's improvisation? I mean, I'm not saying there's no value in learning other people's improvisations, but this idea of learning specific licks and practicing them in all keys so you can do them on command is a thing that people do, and I think they overdo it. I think people then have no choice but to play those licks because they practice them too much and they just fall under their hands. And I don't want that to be my playing. I want the resolutions to sound good, but I don't want to play entire phrases that come from someone else. I just want to get the details right of the resolutions. So people who practice enclosures play a lot of enclosures. People who don't practice them play fewer, but they're still there because it's part of the language. So that's my general answer. But I do want to show you something because I mentioned earlier that yes, practicing improvisations is a thing, and I want to do something here. I want to bring up. I've got these transcribed solos. There's the Dick Oates solo. Yeah, that's not going to work there. I want to load this thing up. So what folder are we in? I want to see what folder we're in here. Come on. We're in MuseScore 3, Scores, Education, Blues for Alice. I just want to load up this score for a moment here and actually take a look at a real score. Okay, so it was Scores. And it was my Education folder. These are two transcribed solos. And the thing that these have, Red Rodney was a trumpet player who actually played with Charlie Parker. He was in Charlie Parker's band. He didn't learn enclosures by studying other people's solos that had enclosures. They were a natural part of his language. And so we'll see some enclosures here. But also, if I load Dick Oates' solo, Dick Oates is a much younger musician. I mean, he's my age. That's younger than Red Rodney, anyhow. So hopefully this will load up in a second. Dick Oates learned the language by studying the solos of Charlie Parker and Red Rodney from recordings, as opposed to like naturally the same way Red Rodney did. So their use of enclosures might tend to be different. But Dick Oates is a real master, I would say, of the language. As for someone who has learned it later, Dick Oates did a really good job of it. And unfortunately, the score is not loading because who knows why, because when I'm trying to demonstrate things, my system doesn't like it. So I'm going to close this window and go to Plan B here, which is just to open, because I think I've got that sucker as a PDF also. Because I do want to actually show this, and then we'll bring some people on board to start playing around with some of these things. So I just want to show you an actual improvised solo. How about if I sort by name? I don't have the PDF. All right, so I might have to not... let me just try this again, see if it wants to come up if I try again, because that might be all it needs is another invitation. But if it doesn't want to come up, it doesn't want to come up. And, oh! Here we go. All right, so I'm going to do a quick little look around here, and here I can see is an enclosure there. And this was not a chromatic, but this E is kind of a ghost note there. So he's enclosing the third of that chord. And I'm kind of like honing in on enclosures because I know what they look like. And so I can kind of spot them. Here's a kind of enclosure type figure in which he's, wait a minute, where's the one I was looking for? This guy right here. Check this one out. So he's kind of enclosing that B flat, although he didn't really have a step above it. He only had the steps below into it. So this is the thing that his language here is maybe not as enclosure heavy as some people's would be. Here's another version. Enclosing the D flat. But there's not chromatic alterations on this. This is because, again, Red Rodney's language was sort of naturally developed in the day when this stuff was coming on board, wasn't studied in the same way. So if I now bring up Dick Oates's solo, who's, I said, the younger, he's, again, my age, but Red passed away not too long ago. I got to play with him, actually, when I was in college. That was a lot of fun. But if I bring up Dick Oates's solo, if it wants to come up, and if it doesn't, that's okay too. It's working on it. Here we go. If I look at Dick Oates's solo, I'm going to see more of these chromaticism sort of things. Like right off the bat, oops, there's a little enclosure around that A. Yeah. And I probably, here's like another kind of enclosure here. Enclosing the F. And here's an enclosure around this F. Yeah. So, yeah, maybe every 8 bars or so we're running into something that's enclosed kind of in that sense. Here's another one, enclosing a B flat. Am I going to find more that have that chromatic alteration in them? Yeah, probably. If I keep hunting around. But anyhow, that's, you can look at, and this is a solo transcription I transcribed myself from the recording, and I assign it as when I was teaching a jazz improv class, I would give people the recording and say, here, you guys transcribe some of this solo. And so they would find, I would get to compare a lot of different people's transcriptions of this, because sometimes it's hard to make out the exact notes on these recordings because they go by fast. And there's software that can slow it down, but sometimes the pitch on the notes, that's why I have these ghost notes marked sometimes, because sometimes, like this note here, it's not clear what pitch it actually was. His finger didn't completely cover the hole, or I guess saxophones don't have holes, but the airstream didn't catch up to the note is the way that works. So, and often the rhythms aren't precisely metric, and there's some disagreement over exactly how to notate certain rhythms. So when you have 2 different people transcribe a solo, you will often get 2 slightly different results, and it's not a question of right or wrong, but it did give me the opportunity to really look at every note of the solo and decide, do I like this note? Do I think that this, not do I like the note, but do I think that I've transcribed it as well as I can? So I think these are pretty darn accurate transcriptions. All right, so that's me talking, that's me demonstrating. I want to now open things up. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to flip over to here, and I want to see people raise hands if you are in a position where you can actually where you can actually come on board here, and I'll invite you on, and then you can get your camera going. And so just raise your hand if you're interested in coming on and trying your hand at some improvisation here, and we can talk about things. Meanwhile, I want to do something else here. I want to show you my setup, because that was a topic of discussion in office hours, and I figure there's probably some interest in this. So I'm just going to show you with this camera here what we are looking at, what my setup actually looks like. Come on. Hello. Okay. Now, are you guys seeing what I'm seeing? Because I'm not convinced that I'm seeing what I'm supposed to be seeing here, but I'm just going to try it anyhow. This,
There we go.
is my setup.
So here's my digital piano, keyboard sitting on top of it. You can see my mic on a boom stand here, lamps on a reflector so that it lights up my face. There is my overhead camera. And you're probably hearing weird echo from me because I'm picking up my voice twice. So sorry about that. Here, that actually fixes that. So the overhead camera is on that boom stand here, but I also can do this with just a desk lamp. I have a desk lamp. Like I could have clipped that right on to this lamp here, and all sorts of different ways you can get a camera overhead like that. And then I have a program that I developed, and you can use that program to actually manage the thing where you can show that camera while also showing your face. All right. I'm going to go back now.
All right. So, y'all hearing me okay? Because now I'm not sure if in that process, if I got everything back the way it's supposed to be. Hopefully I did. So let me know if you're all hearing me okay. So is there a process for doing transcription? Everyone kind of has their own. I do have my own process for it. Maybe sometime I'll do a lesson on that. Tell you what, I'll do a whole lesson on solo transcription and do that as part of that musicianship workshop, because it'll be a nice in-depth thing where I'll get to actually go through the process a little bit. And yeah, maybe I'll do that for my next session. So meanwhile, though, you don't need to have the fancy setup like this. Oh yeah, so I mentioned that I have an app that I use. The app that I use, I'm going to just give you the link to where you can find out about it more. Give me a moment. But yeah, I want to see some volunteers. I want to see people either just say in the chat or raise hand. There's a little raise hand icon. Just let me know that, hey, I want to come on board and try some improvisation here, because, yeah, I want to be able to give some people some comments. But meanwhile, I'm going to post this link to this app, which is an app that I developed, which is what I actually use to manage the multiple camera setup. So it's right here. There we go. So this is an article that I wrote there in the community. So it's in one of the spaces there. It's called Recommended Resources. And it's an article I wrote about my app. And the app is what enables me to do that thing where my camera's on my face, but also a screen share if I want to have that. And then also in fact, I do want the screen share. So I don't want the screen share, but I do want the app. So I'm going to come back to my app and share it. But now I will flip over to the app, and I'm actually going to turn off the screen share and just turn on my cameras. So I want the live stream is the camera for my piano, front camera for my face, start cameras, boom, there we are. Now I'm full screen. Yeah. So this is what we're dealing with here. And now let me come back over and so The lighting has too much light, doesn't clearly show how to control the lighting. Yeah, so this is always tricky, and yeah, I'm happy to answer this question. So right now, let me turn off my lamps. If I turn off my lamps, first of all, my face is in shadow, but also there's shadows on the keys here, right? And so I've been experimenting with different ways of doing this, but the problem is the camera has like some sort of automatic sensor, automatic exposure adjustment, and it's overexposing. Yeah, it should be darker, and unfortunately, that's just the way it is. Now, as soon as I put my hands on the keys, as you change what's being, what the camera is showing, it's going to continually adjust that exposure. But yeah, it's not ideal. It is not ideal. I need to find ways of overriding that exposure or adjusting my light to make things a little better. But yeah, you're right. It's definitely a bit overexposed right now. Okay, so I'm coming over here, and I still don't see any hand up icons here from any volunteers, and that's fine. If no one's interested, I will keep talking and keep trying things. But definitely interested in anyone who wants to come on and try your hand at some improvisation. I know it can be scary, but that's part of life. So I'm going to do one other thing then. If you watched the cafe yesterday, I was talking about my piece, All Dudes, and I went through the transcription there. And the solo section is large. It's not entirely one chord, but a whole lot of it is based on B flat 7. That's a good chunk of the tune. And then there's a couple other chords here and there. But a lot of the improvisation is basically just on B flat 7. So because the improvisation is largely B flat 7, this is then what I need to be able to do is improvise on that. And we have a scale for that. We call it Mixolydian. Mixolydian scale is a B flat major scale, but with an A flat in it. And then what I want to do as an improviser is practice improvising with that scale. I've been doing all these demonstrations with C major because it makes it easy to see things and kind of visualize these notes are in the key, these notes are outside the key. When I'm improvising with B flat Mixolydian, I want to develop that same mentality. So I'm going to do another little silly demonstration for you here. Here's some perfectly correct, if terrible, improvisation in the key of C major. All right, I can do this all day long, carry on a conversation, look behind me while I'm doing it, right? It takes no skill to improvise badly in the key of C major, but at least correctly, right? I never played a single note not in the key of C major. What you want to do is develop that same skill for all your scales, not just your all your scales, basically, all your keys especially. So here, I've got my B flat Mixolydian scale, which is the same notes as E flat major, but I'm not in the key of E flat major. I'm in the key of B flat. It's just it's a bluesy thing, and so A flat is part of the thing. So I want to have that same ability to just kind of randomly do this. And I can't do it quite as well, but I heard myself play a wrong note. But, right, I'm playing random nonsense. It's quite terrible. But it was correct, right? Other than that one wrong note I played. I have that same skill of being able to, if I look at what I'm doing, then I can do it much more successfully. I haven't played a wrong note yet. And again, it's meaningless nonsense. But my hands know where B flat Mixolydian is. Well, that's a good starting point. That's another thing you can practice. It's just familiarizing yourself with different scales by actually improvising with them. So yeah, still seems to be the case that we have some shy folks here, and that's fine. I get it, and you don't want to put yourself out there. I totally get that. But what I want to do now is I'm going to do the same sort of thing that I was doing in the key of C, but I'm going to do it in the key of B flat, and it's again going to be about taking the notes of the tonic triad here, and approach them by half step. So all right, I'm singing. Why am I singing? I'm singing for a couple reasons. One, because Joanne just mentioned that you're not near an instrument. You can sing. You can sing your improvisations. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da. Ba-da-dum. You want these things in your voice as much as you want them in your fingers, and not because you actually intend to sing your improvisations for real. Even if you have no intention of singing in public, the thing is the ear is what we're relying on. We want to play what we're hearing in our heads, and we want to make sure we have that connection between when I press this E button on the piano as a way of resolving to F. I don't want to just do it because some theory book told me to play an E to resolve to that F. I want to do it because I know what it's going to sound like. And I want to make that sound. I want to say, hey, I want that sound of that E going to F. And it's not just about E going to F, it's about E over a B flat chord. It's sharp 4 going to 5. It's the same thing that in the key of C was sharp 4 going to 5. So sharp 4 going to 5, thinking of these in terms of scale degrees, knowing sharp 4 to 5 and over a dominant chord. Because before I was over major chords, now I'm over a dominant 7th chord. So I'm singing my line in part to make sure that I really believe what I'm playing, that it's coming from my brain and my ear, not just from the theory book telling me that I'm supposed to play this note. I want to know that that's really what that note's supposed to sound like. So then Rod, about not knowing modes being a block to being able to improvise, well, no, not really. The thing is, major scale is 90% of improvisation. If you know your major scales, you know most of it. Because even if, I'm saying Mixolydian is the thing here, but even if you didn't know Mixolydian, knowing B flat major is the key of B flat. All you have to know is that, okay, key of B flat are those notes, but the chord symbol says B flat 7. And if you know what notes are in a B flat 7 chord, you know it has an A flat instead of an A natural. So your notes for improvising are B flat major, but A flat instead of A natural, because that's what that chord calls for. Knowing your chords is quite useful for improvisation. Knowing all the modes, yeah, fine, sure. You can know them, you can not know them. But there's plenty of people who improvise successfully without knowing much about chords at all. If you don't know much about chords at all, then you rely exclusively on your ear. And that's a thing also. There are plenty of improvisers who basically, now, first of all, a lot of the stories about like famous musicians who couldn't read music or didn't know any theory are often exaggerated. They are often exaggerated. Yeah, they might not have been great music readers, but if you gave them enough time, they'd be able to plunk out the notes. But that's not how they learn. That's not their main mode of learning music. It's by ear. Or if they say they don't know theory, it doesn't mean they don't know what a 5 chord going to 1 sounds like and how to play it. It just means that terminology isn't like foremost in their brain. But it means if they're a famous musician, it's probably because their ear is guiding them to those same concepts, whether they can elaborate on them or not. Well, that is my goal too. I want my ears to guide me to the right notes, and yeah, my brain can help along. But I want it to be largely about my ear guiding me to the right notes. So, practicing by singing while improvising is actually a fine way to get there. Um, I'm fairly middlingly good at this. I would say I used to not be because I didn't practice it at all. And I would not have been able to do that, 20 years ago. But I kind of have made it a point of really getting deeper inside of this sort of thing and to the point where I can do that. And I can do it without playing it also. I knew what note, every single note that I was just singing, I knew exactly which note it was. And so when I finished there, I knew where I was and I was able to put my finger down and continue where I left off. That knowledge of what notes of the sound I want is coming from my ear, knowing how to make it is coming from my brain and fingers, but all these things need to work together. Again, when I talk about what do we practice when we practice improvisation, in a nutshell, that's it. Yes, some of it's about those specific notes, and I was getting a lot of that e da 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 ba dum da dum da ba da ba ba dum A natural to B flat, but E to F da ba da ba bum boo. E to F, D sharp, I mean C sharp to D, B flat, B, A, B flat, D, E flat, E, F, G, F sharp, E, F. I could sing every single note that I'm G, F sharp, E, F. I'm singing my enclosures because I know what they're going to sound like. It's not just putting my fingers down because some theory book told me to. And that's I guess, coming back to Rod about knowing your modes. Am I able to sing this because I know my modes, or is it because I know this language? Plenty of people know languages that don't have the skill of writing in that language, but they've spoken the language all their life. So, yeah, that is absolutely positively a thing. Um, so, yeah, this practicing of improvisation, absolutely something that you can do. You can practice these specific skills. You practice targeting individual notes like I was doing earlier, practice creating lines that combine all of those things, practice singing while improvising because now you're developing that ear connection. And you could do that just sticking within the C major. Just practicing improvising and singing while you improvise, not even changing from a one chord to five chord, just sticking with a C. Just sticking with C major. That's some good ear training for that's going to help you with improvisation as well. So these are all things that you can practice. But what I'll recommend then is go ahead and record yourselves and then post some of your improvisations. If you're not wanting to come on here and do it live, try just make yourself do this and make yourself record yourself and put it out there. The world is full of music. It's full of words. Every word I'm saying right now is improvised, right? If I came on and brought you on to have a conversation with me, you're improvising your conversation and you're okay with it, right? I mean, we get over I guess there's fear of public speaking. That is a thing, right? I don't have that. I have a fear of recording. If we want to get down to it, like when I think about my musical situation, I do really well in live performance. I can get nervous if the crowd is especially large, or if I know there's like musicians that like are my like heroes or mentors or whatever. If I feel like I'm being, judged on my performance here, I'll get nervous. But mostly live performance, not scary for me. Recording is. Recording my own music, I get really uptight because, if I make a mistake, I'm going to have to like hear that on the recording forever. And I don't care if I make a mistake live so much because it's gone. but recording does freak me out a little bit. And I notice the same thing doing tutorial videos. I can go on forever on these master classes, but if I'm if I'm recording a tutorial video, I get all uptight. That's me. So I want you to get a little over whatever uptightness you have and just put it out there and just say, you know what, I can talk without a script. I bet I can play music without a script. And if I'm sitting here talking without a script, am I giving the greatest speech known to mankind? No. But it's still worth saying. If you improvise some music, is it the greatest piece of music ever written? Well, maybe not. But it's worth hearing, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be this like grand, perfect thing to be worth hearing. We're hearing different sounds every moment of our lives. Why not some of the sounds that you just improvised? Why is that any worse sound than hearing me talk or hearing this fellow next door closing the door, which I just heard a little bit ago, or hearing a car horn, or hearing birds chirping, or any other sound? Why not? Why is that less worth hearing than any other sound I might ever choose to hear? It's just a more sound, something to occupy our day with. So, as far as the simple process for recording, that's going to depend on your gear. Like if you have a digital piano and you're comfortable, like that's going to be your instrument, then you can use its own built-in recording function for that. Assuming it has one, and then it probably has some way of upload. I don't know. Everyone's pianos are different, but just your phone, just setting up the video recorder on your phone. Put it on. Where's my thing? I've got a. It's way over there. I have this cute little stand. I have this thing on my phone, a pop socket. Y'all probably know that. They make also a stand that you can like set your phone on and point it at the keyboard, and then it's a pretty decent little camera stand. I'm sitting over here is a little hospital table. That's what this is. This is a table like you would have at a next to a hospital bed. And I use this as a desk and a stand for things because it's a nice height. It's higher than an average table, but I can raise it and lower it. So anyhow, you make do with what you got. If you just have a tall stool you can set your camera on, that works fine. If you're playing a saxophone or something, set it in front of you. If you're playing piano, I find like above the shoulder to be a pretty good angle where you can kind of see into the keys, okay? So I don't know. I don't have great answers because that's going to depend on the specifics of your environment, your instrument, your equipment. But yeah, that could be another topic of another session sometime. All right. So I feel like I've said my piece here, and that my challenge for you is go out and make music. Do these things. Do like I'm doing here. Target some chord tones. Target that 1, 3, and 5 on your one chord with half steps. With whole steps too, but half steps when they're outside the key are really fun and interesting, and just find ways of working that in to your music. So that is my story here. And Johnny May, I'm not actually familiar with him, but by all means check him out. I'll check him out myself, and because I'm not familiar with that name, but my time has come to say this. Thanks everyone for being here for the music masterclass, and we got to talk a lot about improvisation, a lot about targeting of notes, and again, if you're not already in the musicianship skills workshop, that's where I kind of laid out the foundation for all this and described the things. So I highly recommend checking that out. Becoming a gold level member so you can access the videos from the musicianship skills workshop. And if you are already, by all means, watch the videos. There's a couple of really nice ones on improvisation. So, but yeah, glad if Johnny Mays are good. There's a lot of good stuff out there. We all learn somehow. I learn from videos sometimes. So by all means, check out whatever you think is going to help you. So everyone, be posting some videos. I'll be interested to see some, and maybe we can comment on each other's stuff and give each other feedback. All right, see you next time. Bye.